This is Greg Canty here, and welcome to the Win Happy podcast. Stay tuned for interesting chats with interesting people about winning their lives and being happy at the same time. This show has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. Thanks for listening. On today's podcast, I chat with conductor and composer Vincent Kennedy, who has just released his 10th album, Music of People and Place, performed by the RT Concert Orchestra. On part 1, Vincent chats about a piece of music he heard when he was just 3 years of age that changed his life, mastering the trumpet, winning multiple awards as a young boy, and going on to compose his own music. We also chatted about the recent movie Maestro, about the life and career of conductor and composer Leonard Bernstein that featured Bradley Cooper. Let's hear from Vincent. Vincent Kennedy, a huge welcome to the Win Happy podcast. How are you doing?
I'm good, Greg. Thanks very much for having me. It's really nice to meet you.
It's an honor. I've recorded a lot of Win Happy episodes, and it's the first time I've had a conductor and a composer on the show.
Well, that's nice to be the first. Nice combination too. And usually, the thing about composers is that they're often only heard about or recognized when we start to decompose. In the classical music sphere anyway, which is where I'm kind of coming from.
You'd wonder why that happens, wouldn't you?
Yeah, well, I think it's probably that, music just takes time to grow sometimes. Takes time to, it's a bit like an oak tree, or a chestnut tree. It starts small and grows big. It's not like a flower that blooms quickly in the summertime, which tends to be for pop or rock or stuff. Classical music tends to take a long time. And there's lots of instances over the history of it where people in their own lifetimes weren't recognized and forgotten about for years afterwards. Even someone as great as Johann Sebastian Bach was forgotten for 80 years or so after he died.
Which is very sad, really. He probably passed away thinking, well, that was a big waste of time.
No, I don't think he did, because I think, he from what my reading of it, he kind of lived for the day, and certainly they didn't think the way we do about all the other things and all of the razzmatazz that goes on now around people. And he wrote mostly for the church in his hometown. Some of it spread beyond, but, he never did Carnegie Hall. He never visited London, never came to Dublin. People were much more localized in those days. But that's it. Music was also not as big a part of their daily life as it is now. And the only way of making a living was working as a traveling musician or a court composer or a church composer or organist. So it's changed a lot.
And how would his music have been discovered then, and how would it have traveled internationally eventually?
Publishing music, the sheets being written down so that it could be transferred on, and it's kind of like a language so people could read it, irrespective of whether they spoke the word language of the composer. They could actually read the music, and that would have been it. And I think also people have good ears, so a bit like traditional music, they'd hear stuff and they'd remember them. It would be passed on through traditions like that as well. But certainly the publishing helped hugely in getting music out. That went on until the 60s or 70s. A hit song within a couple of weeks, would have a music sheet published and people could have it at their piano if they wanted it. And now it's all changed again, because now it's all digital stuff, which actually is great for getting music around, because you can now have it in PDF format, so you can email it to anyone in the world. So it is different, but the model has changed in terms of income for people, because it's much less than the old way when people sold a lot of records and things like that.
I'm fresh after watching Maestro, the movie that's doing the rounds at the moment with Bradley Cooper playing Leonard Bernstein. Have you seen it?
I have, yeah. And I've been a big fan of Bernstein most of my life. And I read a lot about him before the movie, so I knew the story and I knew his music, a lot of his music too, and his conducting. And he did a great series on television in America, which is still available on YouTube, with the New York Philharmonic and other things, where he introduced music to wider audiences and spoke very, very good speaker. Didn't seem to use notes, just was able to speak very plainly and very well, and in a way that could be understood, I think, by many people. Trying to take classical music certainly from an elite status into every man or every woman's house and bring it back to the people, really, from when it had come in the first place. And I think in the film, I think Bradley Cooper gets better as he ages. I wasn't too comfortable with the early
version of him.
But later, yeah, he grows into it. The BBC did a great program about the making of West Side Story, where Leonard Bernstein conducted a recording much later in his life with Kiri Tekanawa and one of the three tenors, Jose Carreras. And it's fantastic TV or programming because you see the product being made, so to speak. Normally you just get the end product. And, he loses his temper and, he reduces Jose Carreras to tears. One of the greatest tenors in the world, and he can't get a rhythm. And it's driving Bernstein nuts, and he doesn't hold back in terms of his feelings on it. So you see the kind of the anger in the man and the passion at the same time. And then when it comes together, as it does in that recording, it's just magic. And I think it does... what is Maestro 2.5 hours long? You can only squeeze a little bit of someone's life into it, but I think it captures some of the essence of what he was. And also I think it captures a bit of which is something I read about, is, the regret that he had himself that he didn't compose more. He had more in him. And he spent too much time conducting and doing other things. And if he sat at his table composing, he had other things to say. And I think it's interesting, the choice of music that was made, because, one of the last scenes is him conducting Mahler's Second Symphony. And in some ways, I think he aspired to be like Mahler in the breadth and depth of his music, and probably only reached it on occasions. For me, one of those occasions was in the film when they have the big choir singing the finale from the opera Candide, Make Our Garden Grow, and that's fantastic. And I think the choral writing there is on a par with that of Mahler in the Second Symphony. And I think from my reading and my perspective on him, looking back in his life, he kind of regretted that he didn't know more of that.
We don't have enough time, Vincent.
No, well, that's it. So you kind of have to just make your choices and go with it. And I think the other thing, that his success came very early to him, and that can be difficult as well, I think. Because that sort of success then means you're in demand all over the place. It's very hard to withdraw from it, Greg, when you're doing the rounds, to say, no, I'm actually taking 6 months off to write some music. And I think that even that was portrayed in the film when his wife was dying and his agent or someone was onto him about conducting commitment, and he had to argue with the guy that he can't do it, Whereas anybody, certainly in this country, would say if someone knew your personal circumstances, wouldn't come near you with such a request.
Yeah, well, it's a different beast in America, I think, certainly. Use an interesting word there, and it's the essence of the Win Happy podcast, which was about choices. And I do think we make choices along the way, and hopefully to find happiness in your life. And if you can win along with the bargain, well, that's pretty good going. And again, for me, winning isn't about money. It's about achieving your objectives, whatever they are. If we learn and we keep on making good choices, well, hopefully we can achieve that. And again, as you were saying in the movie, there just isn't enough time.
For me, for parts of my life, I certainly felt I wasn't going to places I wanted to go. And then later came a realization, well, there's only so much I can control, and I need to concentrate on the bits that I can control and try and enjoy the journey. And that's very much the way I am now. Just enjoying these moments, like when you get to my age, or I feel that it's great just to be alive. Every day is a blessing. Because I've had a lot of really good friends die young. My own dad passed away when I was 14, he was 53. So I know about that and that aspect of it. So it's great to say it, like trying to make the most and live in the present. It's not so easy to do. Well, one of the things I do is that I feel that, with the culture we live in now, where it's text and email and all that sort of stuff, a lot of beautiful messages and beautiful things that people tell you or share with you are lost. So I actually physically write down things that people send to me, either text or in emails, that really mean something, so that I can look back on them maybe when things aren't going so well and say, well, hold on, there are good things, good people out there. People have said good things. When I first put my composition out there, it was like taking your heart out of you, Craig, and holding it up to people who had daggers to stab it. You're giving out a part of yourself. And it takes a long time to get the courage to be brave enough to do that. And I think some people fail at the first, they're so wounded at the first step that they can hide away, or they can hide away for a long time. And then as you grow older, if you're lucky, you grow in confidence about yourself. And it took a long time for me to be that person, to be the more confident person, to believe in myself and not be afraid to say that I believe in myself, and not be afraid to say that I think that what I do is really great. And that's not a kind of an arrogance, although some people might think it is. It's actually a belief that says, well, if I don't believe in my music, why would I expect anyone else to? So I think you have to have your own belief, first of all, before you expect anyone else to have it. And so if I think something is good, I'm happy with that, whether or not others like it. And so the being content and realizing that you have good things is a great point to reach, but it can be very hard to get there, and it can take a long time. There's no magic button, You're not going to reach it overnight, I don't think.
That intuition you have about writing things down, nice things that people have said, and capturing those in a journal. Have you been doing that for a long time, and where did that come from, that idea?
So I have been doing it for, I'd say, best part of 25 years at this stage. Well, part of it came, I had very bad experiences as a child, which I won't go into. And they kind of came back to me in early adulthood and manifested themselves in panic attacks and stuff like that, which went on for a long time, and which eventually I overcame. And part of it was, the writing down was actually positive affirmation to get me to the point where I could calm down and be, happy in myself and confident in what I was doing. I describe that as like a boiling kettle. Just because the steam isn't coming out of it doesn't mean that it's really hot and it's going to hurt you. There's no overnight solution to that. Like, you just have to keep working at yourself. I'm very proud of myself and having overcome those things, but it didn't happen overnight. It took a lot of courage on my part, a lot of love of the people around me to support me in that. It's kind of like emerging out of the darkness. You begin to see the dawn, and you know that there's a better future up ahead if you just keep going. But it wasn't always easy. So those sort of things, writing down nice things that people said. And I also have, by the way, an email folder exactly called that, nice things that people said, where I put stuff in as well. For those days when maybe things aren't going so well, and you're looking for some positivity, and you're looking for some affirmations from other people other than yourself, because sometimes you can just get tired telling yourself, it's good when you're not feeling so good. I found reading certain books. One of the books I read, which I do go back to, it's one of the few books I reread or reread chapters on, is Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of, I can't remember the title of it.
Successful People or something, I don't know.
Yeah, it doesn't use the word. I don't think it's successful people, but in that, he kind of has drawn together a lot of literature and good things, And like everything else, they're simple phrases, that everything, on one sense, it's like being asked $1 million question. If you know the answer, it's simple. If you have a doubt, it's no longer simple. And creating, I think, helped the process of overcoming things, because you have an avenue of being able to take something that's inside you and maybe turn it into something nicer, use the energy for something else. So it's been a therapy for me as well, writing.
Well, you're talking about books. On the previous episode of the When Happy podcast, I had Shane Craddock. He's like a leadership coach who's brought out a book called The Inner CEO. And the basic message there, and it's not about CEO as in business, but you can be the CEO of your own mind.
Yeah.
His whole point is you are not your mind.
Yeah.
You can be the boss of your mind, and you can control how your mind works. And as you say, it's nice when you end up wandering down a dark path to have your notebook that reminds you, hey, there's good stuff going on here too. Thank you very much. You said a beautiful thing, and I've seen it written down a few times in bios and what have you. Music has been a faithful friend, always there to uplift, distract, colour and comfort.
Yes.
That's pretty huge, isn't it?
It is. And it's true. I mean, music has always been there. Like my earliest memory is of when I was 3. We lived in a very small house, and I shared a bedroom with one of my sisters and a bed with my brother and an uncle who lived with us. And everything, premium space was at a premium, and the radio was in our bedroom. So my mother used to come in the morning and turn it on to wake us up. And this particular morning, a piece of music came on. I didn't know what it was, but it had a huge effect on me. It was a classical piece of music, and I subsequently then got into classical music by accident, just by being in the right place at the right time, right school as it was. It was probably when I was 15, so 12 years later before I knew what that piece of music was. And it was the scherzo from Beethoven's 7th Symphony. But it had, I still remember the profound effect it had on me as a 3-year-old, where it filled kind of every cell of my being. And music then, when I did get into it, tunes had that effect on me, because a lot of what was around me was dark, and somehow music had a way of making light inside of me and bringing me to different places, And then I played in a concert band, and we do a lot of music, particularly from America, and it would have titles that have like Yellowstone National Park, and I'd be picturing these places through the music. It was a very visual manifestation of it. And I was able to go there into those happy places. And then when I started playing, it was when I was 12, I got into the National Youth Orchestra. And the first symphony I did was Tchaikovsky's 5th Symphony, which was almost impossible for a 12-year-old, for me as a 12-year-old to play. But it's a bit like going from playing 7-a-side in the small goals into the big goals. They're huge, and the pitch is huge, but eventually you get used to it. But that sort of music would take me places. I could just sit back, and it was tapes in those days, and listen to the music and be brought back to the joy of the course where we were learning the music, or be brought to a happy place. Funny thing was that, some music can sound sad, and sad music always helped to uplift me, And that's why it has always been there, when everything else at times seems to have failed me, and nearly everyone, or I felt that was probably a false judgment. But the music was there. I could turn it on, I could play it, and it would bring me back. And then I had a very good memory, so I could actually hear it in my own head. I didn't even need sometimes to turn it on, and still don't. I can play it back in my head, and it can bring me to those happy places. So for me, that's what one of my purposes in writing is to try and to convey the music and open it out to people, and maybe it'll bring them to places that'll distract them from the troubles and the worries of the world, even for a few moments, or inspire them to do something. And for me, the best music makes me dream. One of the things growing up in the 60s and 70s, like that was a fantastic period, I think, of written music, particularly in song, pop songs or rock songs. But I always listen to the music, right? I very seldom listen to the lyrics. So I'm having a rediscovery now, because I'm now hearing the lyrics for the first time, because I heard it as music, the whole complete thing. That for me was very profound. And then people would be quoting the lyrics to me, and I wouldn't know what they were, even though I'd heard the song, because I was hearing the sound and not translating the sound into the words. So having a rediscovery is good as well. And it's amazing how much of that music is fresh, that you hear it now, and it's as fresh as when you heard it first, And not all music lasts like that, I don't think. Or maybe it goes through cycles where it's fresh, and then for 20 years it's not, 30 years, and then it comes back around again, or you hear a different interpretation of it. But also, I think my essence in music, it goes back to my first experience. So I think music is the most natural things for human beings. So it doesn't need to be explained to people. You just play the music and have a reaction. And I think that's the best type. And I've witnessed it that some, say, classical music, sometimes people spend more time explaining it than it takes to perform it. It's fundamentally wrong in that for me.
Music has an amazing gift to take you somewhere. I get totally blown away. You can be at something, going about your business, and a song comes on the radio, or it's been played somewhere, and God Almighty, you're back there.
Yeah,
you're back there as a kid, or you're back there on that holiday, or you're back there with that person, and it marks moments of time. I was having a big conversation with a friend of mine, and he was just explaining to me that his brother just didn't get music.
Yeah.
It wasn't in his life. He didn't listen to the radio, didn't have any albums. He just didn't like it. And we were chatting, we were saying, oh my God, what a sad life not to have that appreciation of music even in it, and that role that it plays for you. I listened to that piece trying to figure out what it would have been like as a 3-year-old hearing it. And it's an interesting piece. And I heard the rhythm of it, that there was lots of life in it as well when I heard it. I was trying to figure out, as a 3-year-old, what it must have been like for you and why it captured your imagination in that way. Do you understand it?
No, I don't. I don't understand why. Because, on one level you might think, and it's probably even the mistake that we make sometimes, when we're introducing sometimes children to music, we introduce simple music, for want of a better word, like say, and yet this is the most complicated piece, And we have an interesting experience recently because our granddaughter and grandson, the grandson is 2 now, but when he was about 1.5 years, his parents discovered that he liked a particular piece of music of mine and he'd fall asleep to it. And then when they told me about it, what surprised me was it's not a slow piece, right? It's not a quiet piece, right? And yet I witnessed it minding him one night. He woke up looking for his mommy crying, and I just turned on my phone and put the piece of music on, and in 10 seconds he was gone back asleep listening to this piece of music, And then a few weeks later, we were reminding them again, and he woke up again, and I said, sure, no problem, I'll just put the music on, right? And I put the music on. He said, no, not that one.
Oh dear.
He had changed. And it wasn't then when his parents came home, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you, he's changed to the steam train. And the steam train, again, is not a quiet piece. It's literally about a steam train, and it's very noisy. And yet, even though that's a kind of a fast, loud piece, it put him to sleep, So I can't explain why. Well, except that I see there that there's another example of a complicated piece causing peace in someone, and a complicated piece. And what I mean by complicated is a lot of notes, a lot of rhythm, a lot of movement, kind of filled me in a magical way. And I can, if I hear it or I conduct it now, it brings me back to that place. It's just as you said, the way music can tip people. I had an interesting experience. I was rehearsing a few months ago the music from Rocky, the bum 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 bum.
Yeah, Survivor.
Yeah, with young people, and one of the parents came in, and he's a leader in the world in which he lives, and he said to me, "That's my fight song, That's why I came in." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Whenever I'm going for an interview or for something big, I put that on as loud as I can on my earphones, and I blast it out, and I go in and all pumped up." So like even from that perspective, it has that. So it can have both sides, the calming as well as the building up people to do things. And some people, I know Americans are great for kind of breaking everything down, but they kind of, with some people, they go back to, well, what inspired you? Always listen to a piece of music, or well, always listen to that piece of music, always lift left leg and, scratch your head with your right arm or whatever, have your, and if you don't have those things, it's not going to go, maybe not going to go as well for you, but you can become too reliant, I think, on those things as well. It's good to be free.
On the subject of young people and learning music, and I saw in a piece that I think you were responding to some question about a violin piece that you watched a particular player playing the violin somewhere. Who was that character?
That was Hilary Hahn, who's an American violinist, fantastic. And during the summer, I was in Tanglewood in Massachusetts, which is actually featured in the Maestro film with Bernstein, because he was there during the summers as well. And Tanglewood is in the countryside. Tanglewood is a small village in the Berkshire Mountains in Massachusetts. I think they're Massachusetts. And originally it was a covered stage, and the Boston Symphony Orchestra would decamp from Boston there for the summer and do concerts. And other people would do concerts, like James Taylor does concerts there. And then in the way of America, some billionaire donated what's called a shed, which in fact is a kind of a roof that fits 10,000 people underneath it. It still has open sides. And the Boston Symphony were there again this summer, and we happened to be there at the time and went up to a rehearsal, and they have open rehearsals. So you can go in, and Hilary Hahn was there rehearsing with the Boston Symphony. And when I say rehearsing, actually, like there wasn't much rehearsal because she played the whole piece by heart and they played it almost straight through. There was very little stopping. And any of the stopping was just for the conductor to do something with the orchestra to get them to play softer or play in a particular way. There was no corrections on her part. And actually, there was a lovely moment when she was on stage, because it's all very casual, it's very informal. People are just in their normal gear, everyone is. And she came on stage, lovely smile, very friendly looking. And the music started, the introduction to it, and just where I was sitting, this woman passed and she had a number of children with her, and the two of the children stopped and they started waving at the stage. And then she started waving back at them. And it was pretty clear then that they were actually her children, but it was just lovely to see it. And then she started playing and it was just magical, you think about it, when a violinist puts their fingers up on the strings, what they can do with each of those fingers in conjunction with their bows is just, it's beyond brain surgery, the intricacies they can get, and it's just wonderful to witness it in a live performance. And
well, when I read that piece, and I saw it written as well about that experience you had as a 3-year-old, it reminded me of a phone call I got last year. You probably know the character, Maria Kellerman.
Yeah.
And she operates the Young European Strings. Yeah, exactly. And she teaches 3-year-olds violin and are kids as young as 3. And I'm thinking, that's crazy, Maria. How does this work? But obviously they have a capacity to learn this instrument at a time when they're still learning the language, and basic things like, addition and everything else. But for some reason, we have the capacity to learn instruments at that stage, which I thought was amazing as someone who was pushed out to do piano lessons as a 7-year-old. And 7 years later, I think I knew no more than what I did the first day I walked in.
Maybe when you were pushed into some things, there's a resistance against it. So you're not as open as when, you're 2 or 3, when everything is open to you and there's no judgment has arrived in your minds. And I remember somebody said once that, that every 4-year-old in China speaks Chinese. It's a really complicated language, yet every 4-year-old speaks it. And that sort of tells you the capacity of the child's mind to be able to do things. And if you see small children and they watch television and their dances on the programs that they watch, and to see a whole group of them dancing totally together in rhythm, 3, 4-year-olds, like our capacity to actually do those things. Maybe what's happening subsequently is we're shutting off part of our brains, to that being able to learn so much. And maybe the earlier we start things, not that we want to churn out virtuoso violinists for life, but just the earlier we're exposed to people to things, maybe it's better, and not to kind of restrict them in terms of let them find their own level, like not say, oh, well, we're going to start off in a so-called simple way, well, why not? They experience everything else full, they experience the universe, the stars, the moon, the sun, the sky, the flowers, the trees, everything as it is. They're not taught, oh, there's a simple tree, they experience it. The big dogs, for them, come up to them and they're not frightened by them. But there might be a small dog to us, but for them, they're half their size or over their size. They take in so much, and then they forget bad things. I think it's one of the great things about children. They forgive so easily. They just move on, and it'd be great to have that childlike quality all through life.
Wouldn't it?
To be able, because so much stuff kind of hits us in the forehead, and I think that's one of the things I say now to people is that I now let a whole lot of stuff go over my head. I duck, I don't let it hit me in the forehead anymore, because an awful lot of the stuff that I know would have stressed me out or annoyed me in the past, actually within a very short period of time doesn't matter anymore. There are few things that matter, I think there are very few things that are really serious. I think you go into an emergency department, you'll see really serious things, Everything else is just a judgment call.
Yeah, and as a 3-year-old, you can do everything and you can try everything. And when you get older, then you tell everyone about the things you can't do. I'm not able to do that.
I think as we get older, we often know the difference between what's good and what's not good. And so what happens is our adult or older mind wants us to get to being good. And we forget that actually it takes time to get to be good. Like you can't grow a tree, that takes 40 years to grow in a year, And what I think happens with adults when they go back to further education sometimes is they run out of patience with themselves, instead of just doing the little incremental thing. And now I was saying to there's quite a number of people I know, adults, who've taken up music later in life to an instrument. And I was saying to them, and they'd say, oh, I'm not getting very well. And I said, well, what I think you should do is you have your phone, record yourself. Don't listen back to yourself, just record yourself, right? And in 8 weeks' time, record yourself again and listen to the two of them and you'll hear the difference. You won't hear it on a daily basis. You won't even hear it probably on a weekly basis. But if there's a bit of gap, you'll hear a difference, But it's the kind of, oh, today I'm this and tomorrow I'm not that. Or yesterday I could get my fingers around the chord on the guitar and today I can't get that little finger there. But maybe the day after you'll get it, And then it's actually the practice, the repetition, which we never take account of as a child, but which we do all of the time. As an adult, we kind of lose that patience.
Yeah, if we don't sound like Billy Joel after a week, we're getting frustrated.
Well, exactly. Yeah. And I think I've seen it where people have actually stuck with it and have gone on to do all the grades in their 50s and 60s, and older. And it's something I feel very strongly about, that like one of the quality issues that is kind of hidden is ageism, that if you don't make something if you're not something by a certain age, you're never going to get it, But, well, who says that? Okay. Now, apart from the fact that, physically, maybe you can't run as fast when you're 40 as when you were 20 and things like that. But, there's an awful lot that people can achieve. And if you are in your late 50s or 60s and you want to start out as an artist or as a composer or as a poet, a lot of things are geared towards the younger groups. You have competitions or things for under 30s and things like that. But I say it should be about where people are. It should be for people who are starting out. Why put an age thing on it? I pointed this out myself to bodies, and I said, well, if you replace the age of 30 with only males can apply, what do you think would happen? Like why are we limiting things? Why can't somebody be another Grandma Moses and start painting in their 70s and, be fantastic at it? Never had the opportunity before that. And have a whole of life experience to learn and to live and to go on adventures and do things. That we shouldn't be limiting people.
And I'm sure, as we're chatting at the beginning of 2024, there's a lot of houses. They have guitars in a corner. They have keyboards in a corner. Yeah. Lots of instruments that were probably bought as a gift at some point and they're just sitting there. So, yeah, that's a good idea. Just pick the damn thing up.
Yeah, and the other thing is which is great, is like YouTube now has great videos on all these things, to help people. And the great thing about YouTube is that you can stop it or you can play it. You can slow it down. You can. If you don't understand what the point, you can look at it again. And sometimes that's what happens, because I think as adults, we've got to get away from the fear of asking the stupid question, because, I feel stupid about asking this question. Well, maybe everybody else in the room feels stupid about it. And then nobody asks the question. And the person who's trying to help people and show them something doesn't understand that actually nobody's getting it because they're all looking there with smiles and faces as if they know. So we have to test that and to give people the courage to be able to ask questions at any stage, in all aspects of life, and not to feel vulnerable by asking a question. Just you don't understand the way people are doing things. And it was interesting in Covey's book that he was talking about different ways that people learn, and if we take school, for instance, there's a particular academic syllabus and people have to learn that. But some people are good at learning from visual things. Other people are good at learning from hearing things, and they don't always match up. And some people learn in a completely different way as we now have a greater understanding of learning habits and learning things. And it's very hard in teachers, I think, to be able to cater for everything. But as a people, as a civilization, we've got to sort of be open to the fact that actually other ways of thinking are sometimes needed. Just thinking outside, as someone said, rather than thinking outside the box, that we open ourselves up. And from that, then new forms of art and new forms of creativity and new ideas emerge. I don't know how true it is, but the story, I've read that a lot of stuff that's attributed to Einstein isn't true, that. But one of the things I had read was that he was described as a slow learner, so And that's not a bad thing. Sometimes things come slowly to people. But if you have a mechanism or a system that cuts people off after a period of time and they haven't given the answer because they're slow at coming to it, then sometimes people like that, great minds, may be excluded from decision making, And I think nowadays the rush for instant information is not a good thing. When I was younger, there was no social media and there was very little TV and radio, and there was newspapers. When something happened, it took the next day before there were reports on it, comprehensive reports. But in that time, smart minds had a time to think about it and work out different angles and ask questions. Now in the instant world, when something happens and people are looking for an immediate response, it's not necessarily the right one, the immediate one. We need to take time.
The young Vincent in this small house, people spilling from one room to the next. Your mind has been blown away by a piece of music you heard. How did that musical interest develop from there, Vincent?
So there was nothing concrete until I went to school at 7, changed primary school into the city centre of Dublin, and a teacher came and he started teaching instruments, recorder. That was when we were in second class, and then when we were in third, fourth class, we moved on to other instruments. And I picked the trumpet. I didn't know much about it, except I had a cousin who was much older than me and whose husband played trumpet in one of the show bands. So I said, I'll go for the trumpet for that. And I remember when we were being given our instruments, we were all called down and our parents had to pay for them. Some people were getting brand new instruments, and other people were getting secondhand. Well, I was handed a fourth-hand trumpet, and I just felt totally inadequate because it looked awful. The case was terrible state, and then when I opened it up, there was no shine on this instrument at all, right? And I just felt so disappointed. Even though now looking back, I'm sure my parents had to scrape every penny together to buy it. But I was sent up from where I was to school. I was told to go up to a laneway called Denzil Lane, which is mentioned in Ulysses and leads up to the Hull Street Hospital, and go up to Tommy Keeley and Sons. They were a brass manufacturer. So I went up there and I went in, and all these workmen and working there were all looking at this child coming in at 9 years old, carrying this wooden box. And I felt totally self-conscious. And I went up the stairs. When I asked where Tommy Keeley was, they pointed me up there. And when I went upstairs, the only man wearing a suit was this wonderful, happy-faced man. And he turned out to be Tommy Keeley. And he said, "What can I do for your son?" And I said, "Well, a teacher sent me up here with this." So he opened it up and he said, "That's grand. Come back on Friday." Right. So on Friday, I went back. I didn't know what to expect. I had no idea what would be happening. And when I went in, all of the people followed me up the stairs, all the workers, right? And they were all sort of stood around. And Mr. Keeley came along and he said, "Now, the first thing, son, is take these." And he took out a pair of I don't know what they were, cotton, maybe silk gloves. And he said, "You have to put these on." And then I noticed that all around the side of the case the brass had been tapped into it. It looked fantastic. And then he opened it up and it was like pure gold. They had polished it up with the brass thing and turned it from this awful looking thing to the most fantastic looking trumpet, And that just was an inspiration. And that man was an inspiration in my life as well. Just his way of he was a self-made man, very hard worker, who did great things in his community and also as a businessman. And then didn't charge a cent or a penny for this, he just did it. Now, when I was 12, he did come calling and he was involved in the Diocese of Dublin and the music director for Dublin. So we started from the age of 12 then playing at all the big ceremonies all around the city, But it was a great experience, playing and made us better. So that's sort of, once I got into music, I loved it, every moment of it. I couldn't get enough of it. And to this day, I can't understand when people give up music, I know it happens, And the other thing was I was very much into sports, so I found a way of balancing it. I didn't see it as an either-or situation. And then when I was about 17, there was a profound realization that actually the physicality is as important as everything else when you're playing an instrument. And being fit and all that sort of stuff. And that was a great matchup in my head then, because that matched the two great loves I had at that time, music and sport, soccer as it was. And then from that just opened doors and I just went through, I was happy to go through any door really, Did
you realize I'm good at this?
So when I was 12, I was entered in the Feshkiol, the under-18 Feshkiol, and I went to a school in Western Row, the Christian Brothers, right? And from the age of 7, I didn't know until that day that there was a thing called the Royal Irish Academy around the corner from us, the Royal Irish Academy of Music, which is on the main street of Western Row. The reason why the school is called Western Row is that the brothers' house faced down to Western Row, but it was actually on the back of it, the street behind. And I won the Feshkiol. At 12, I won the under-18 Feshkiol. So that was a kind of a sign that there was something. And then at 14, I won the over-18. And at 12, I also became the youngest member of the National Youth Orchestra. And in the trumpet section, the next person in age to me was 18. And then there was 19-year-old and then 2 20-year-olds, one of whom was my teacher. So I didn't know actually how good I was, at that stage. And then when I was about 17 or 8, I had changed teachers and I was playing in the College of Music one day, a trumpet concerto. And there was a knock on the door and one of the principals from the National Symphony Orchestra came in to congratulate the teacher and that they'd never heard him playing so well, And the teacher said, "Oh, it wasn't me, it was this kid here," So the other thing was that at that level, even though I was really good, I also lacked confidence. I didn't know at that stage that there would be darker clouds. And in fact, if I'd gone into being a professional player at that stage, it probably would have ended up being a disaster because when I did get sick, I wouldn't have been able to continue playing. And, I don't know where I would have ended up. But at the same time, it was always there. And it still is. Like I still play the trumpet, sometimes just long notes, kind of as a meditative thing. I play solo for certain things, usually charity things. I really enjoy that. And I play with a couple of friends just in our houses in a group called Four Men and a Bassoon. And it's they're sort of musicians and comedians, and one of them does play the bassoon as well as being a fantastic recorder player and stuff as well. And that's a great thing, to just play music for the sake of it, not be worrying about the size of an audience, just being able to entertain yourself with it.
Yeah. And tell me, career-wise and work and getting a job and all that kind of good stuff and the background that your mum and dad would have had and how that would have shaped choices. Were they trying to have a big conversation with young Vincent about, where you were going, or how did that evolve?
So my father died at 14. So I arrived at Leaving Cert with no idea, really. Actually, I had this idea that I'd like to do social work because I thought I could help people and stuff like that. And the music was very much there. So I kind of fell into, as you did in those days, doing exams. And one of the ones that I did was the School Leavers Executive Officer competition for the civil service. And that's what I did, what I ended up doing, except I didn't do that. There were 7 different jobs. One was a social welfare officer. And I thought, well, that sounds like social work. It was the same level entry, but it was different. So I did that. I started doing that. And then when I was 19, I auditioned for the National Symphony Orchestra and I was offered a job, but it was only a contract for a period. And actually the job I was in was paying more money, so. And then a lot of musicians seemed to be unhappy. And really, I wanted at that stage to compose. And the type of music that I was composing, music with what I call tunes, wasn't in favor in the classical things. So I knew I wouldn't get sort of grants and things like that because it would go to a different type of music. So I did that. So I stayed with the civil service and I composed and taught and conducted the things I wanted to do.
When did you start composing first?
I did my first piece when I was 15. And then I everything else I did after that kind of had one performance, which was really scary in front of your peers, but some of them liked it. And then I kind of kept everything into myself until I was asked when I was about 21 to do the music for a play, Death of a Salesman. That was very good and very well received. So well received by the company who commissioned me to write it. That they used it in about 10 other different plays. It had nothing to do with the original. And it was actually, funnily enough, some of them were involved. Some of the same people were involved in a play with a completely different drama group recently, and they used a new version of it as well, which was kind of it all coming around again. Then I won RT music competition for a piece of music to celebrate the life of Michael O'Hare, the great broadcaster. And that was played then by the Artane band at Croke Park. And, so that gave me a bit of exposure. And and that was tuneful music. And then I just was stubbornly kept to my own belief in my own music and writing tunes. And then, one of the culminations in that was the album then I recorded last year with the RT Concert Orchestra of 18 of my orchestral pieces. And I conducted that recording as well. I conducted them in the recording.
And that's 10 albums in, I believe.
Yeah, 9 before that, of different things. It's not like it used to be, when people used to bring out albums, and I also won a lot of public art commissions. So a lot of them the albums were as a result of that. So they weren't commercial albums. They were just released as a recording of the work, and most of them live in different parts of the country. Well, this was kind of the first full-scale professional one with everything being recorded in studio, mixed in Windmill Lane, and then with the wonderful RT Concert Orchestra as well.
I hope you can join me on part 2, where Vincent chats about the powerful magic of an orchestra, the role of the conductor, and the monumental task of recording 18 tracks in just 2 days. Thank you for listening to the Win Happy podcast, which has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to send me an email at greg@fusion.ie. So until next time, take it easy.